Imagine you're working on a training program and a colleague suddenly gets an idea and they say, oh, you know what we should do? And then they pitch you this idea for a fun thing to make the program more engaging. The idea does sound fun and it wouldn't be too much work for you to implement. But there's one doubt that nags at you. Is this little piece of fun going to lead to productive engagement, or is it going to cause a distraction? Should you implement it? Well, in this video, I'm going to show you a simple test that you can apply to find out if your fun idea is likely to be effective gamification or just a gimmick. When does fun stop being beneficial to learning and start becoming a distraction? Is there a line we can draw? Well, there is a simple test you can apply to evaluate the probability that your idea is actually a gimmick that will weigh the program down. Now, this test is for ideas that you know will add engagement and that you have the bandwidth to implement. So it doesn't tell you if the idea is fun or doable. We're just assuming that it is, and we just want to answer the question, is this a gimmick? The first thing you want to determine is how relevant this idea or playful element is to the training content. And here I'm defining relevance as the extent to which it will help the learner reach the learning objective. This is not make or break, it's just the first part of the test. So let's say you're building a simple program that trains learners working in emergency situations on how to quickly identify dangerous chemicals. One idea you have is to create a visual path with a player avatar gradually moving through the levels from newbie to expert as the learner completes activities. So this shows their progress visually, which can be motivating and engaging, but beyond that, it doesn't really help the learner identify dangerous chemicals. So this would be on the lower end of the relevance spectrum. Another idea you get is to add a level timer that checks how long the learner takes to identify the dangerous substances, and they get bonus points at the end of each level if they've completed it with time to spare. If you think about the context in which this skill will ultimately be used, you know that this is for emergency situations, so speed is relevant to this competence, so you decide that yeah, this mechanic is on the higher end of the relevance spectrum. Now, we're not judging the idea yet. Just because it's not relevant to the learning objective doesn't mean you should throw it out necessarily. Sometimes it can still be worth putting into your program because of added engagement. So right now we're just coldly evaluating its relevance without drawing a final conclusion. The second thing you're going to check is the cost to the learner that this element adds. What I mean by cost here is the extra time it'll take the learner to play through this mechanic, or the cognitive load that it'll add to understand the mechanic, or the extra work or attention it will require from them if you add this element versus if you don't. So here's another idea. Say you decide that at the end of each level, in addition to the learner's score, you're going to have a display that shows them how well they've done on this level compared to the average learner. This is easy to understand. It doesn't add any extra work for the learner. I mean, it's just there, and it doesn't cost any additional time. So that's low cost to the learner. For a higher cost mechanic, say every time the learner finishes a batch of levels, you make them play through a little mini game to unlock the next part. So they have to make their way to the next batch of levels by jumping on platforms and over some obstacles. This adds player workload and time, so the cost to the learner is significant. And I'm not making a straw man here. I see things like this quite regularly in training programs. Now, my avatar on the path thing from before is low added cost, and so is my speed bonus mechanic. The speed mechanic doesn't add any work for the learner. They have the same task to accomplish whether I'm timing them or not, but with this mechanic, they just earn extra bonus points if they do it fast. So it's low added cost. Now, bringing it all together, we get this graph. The low-cost mechanics are down here, and as we saw before, this comparison to the average thing and the avatar on the path thing are on the less relevant side, and the speed bonus is low effort, but it's on the more relevant side. So now we've got 4 quadrants, and in this top corner, we've got higher cost, higher relevance mechanics. So here you'll often see branching scenarios and simulations because they tend to be relevant and require learner effort, but you can also have simpler stuff. For example, say you decide that every couple of levels, a bonus question about chemicals pops up, and if the learner answers it right, they get some extra points. That adds a little time and effort on their part, and it's relevant, so I'd put that up here. Mechanics here are often worth implementing because yes, there's learner effort, but it's wisely invested effort. Down here, we've got the high relevance, low cost mechanics. So this is kind of the awesome zone. Elements here make the training more effective without a lot of additional cost to the learner. If you find a smart infographic or the perfect visual that just makes your content immediately clear to the learner, well, that would be down here. And then we've got low relevance, low cost, and that's what I call the fine zone, as in fine, sure, why not, just put it in, it won't hurt. Badges often hang out here, depending on how they're used. And finally, we have high cost, low relevance. So this is the gimmick zone. My mini game is here because it takes the learner time, work, and attention to play it, and it's not relevant because of course it doesn't help me identify dangerous chemicals. The better I get at this game, the more skilled I'm becoming at clicking the mouse button at just the right time to jump over the obstacles. That's not in my learning objectives. And if you want to make a gimmick, that's the recipe. Put the learner through a low relevance activity that requires time and effort from them, and you've likely got yourself a gimmick. So stay away from that corner. Now you may be thinking that the boundaries between these four quadrants are fuzzy, and you'd be right. Where a mechanic ends up on this chart often depends on how it's implemented. For example, a story that's really tight and on point can be super useful at getting a message across and helping the learner understand a lesson. But if the story starts to ramble, then that increases the time and attention it requires, and if it's got a lot of off-topic details, then it gets less and less relevant to the lesson. But even though the categories aren't absolute, this can be useful as a heuristic to help you figure out how you could modify an existing element to move it away from gimmick territory. You can make it more relevant, reduce the time it takes or the work it takes, or all of the above. This also comes in really handy when you're comparing competing ideas. It can be pretty hard to quantify exactly how much cognitive load an idea will add, but you can probably easily compare the relative cognitive load of one idea versus another so that you can pick the better one. So this can establish a basis for ranking different ideas. In the end, other factors will of course influence your choice of mechanic, project constraints, what the stakeholder prefers, and most importantly, what the content needs. But all other things being equal, this can facilitate discussions and minimize the amount of trial and error, and also help you reach decisions more confidently. If you want to know more about how to use game mechanics for effective training, check out the Effective Gamification Framework. This is my step-by-step program for turning your content into engaging and relevant challenges that help the learner develop skills and knowledge. So check it out in the description below. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.